Ve alkışlarınızla Ron Price geliyor.
And what a wonderful way to start the afternoon. Wasn't that beautiful? Let's give them another hand. What a wonderful metaphor for what leadership can be. And this afternoon we're going to talk a little bit about new generation leadership and how we prepare the leaders for tomorrow. Our company, Price Associates, started in 2004 after I retired from running a global company for 11 years. And we wanted to start a business that could help other leaders go through the same experience that we had had, growing in many different countries and enjoying the variety of cultures, the variety of leadership, and business success at the same time. All of our members at Price Associates have either been the leaders of companies or they've been involved in ownership in some way, and they all bring a different instrument to the orchestra, so to speak. For instance, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, you see Andy Johnson, who's an architect by training. He built and sold an architectural firm. Then he got a master's in counseling. And after doing several years of learning clinical counseling, he became a business advisor, and he's become a world expert on introvert leaders. He's written a great book called Introvert Leadership, Living Authentically in a World That Says You Can't. If you go one step down, you see May Lam, who's based out of our Shanghai office. She went to school in England, and her first job out of school, working for her father, who had a large construction business in Brunei, she was the project manager to build the palace for the Sultan of Brunei, 3,000 rooms, and she was in charge. And if you go one layer down below that, you have Ranjit Nair, who was born in India, grew up in Hong Kong, came to the United States to go to college with about $100 in his pocket, all alone. He graduated in California with a degree in accounting and immediately got his MBA with a focus on technology. He went to work for Arthur Andersen Accounting, and then eventually he was hired by Price Waterhouse, where he worked for a number of years. At Price Waterhouse one day, he went into his boss and said, "These HR people are idiots." And his boss said, "Good, you're in charge." And Ranjit found his passion. It wasn't in accounting, it wasn't in IT, it was in understanding how to bring people together to accomplish something in a common cause. If you go across the top, I'll just mention a couple more. The third one across is Evans Baya. He grew up in Kenya. He went to the United States to go to school, and he didn't get out of school. He got 3 master's degrees and a PhD. And then he went to work for Applied Materials, where he had 300 scientists working with him on developing new products. Once a new product had generated $100 million in sales, they would turn it over to the commercial department and they would start working on developing another new product. Evans does a tremendous job with our clients, helping them think about creating a culture, not only of learning, but a culture of innovation. And of course, if you look hard enough, you'll see that on the far right-hand side, the second picture down, is one of your own, Hassan, who has been so gracious to invite me to be here with you today. He's the leader of TTI Success Insights Turkey, and he's done a very special thing for me, for which I will always be indebted forever. You'll find out more about that in a moment. There's an amazing shift going on in the world today around the topic of leadership. Now, these are statistics for the United States, but they reflect the statistics in any country that you look at in the Western world today, and most countries in the Far East as well. You'll notice that that orange bar is the millennials, those that are born in the 1980s, 90s, up to 2000. You can see that in 2005 they only represented a little bit more than 20% of the workplace. Today they represent just short of 50% of the workplace, and by 2020 they will represent over 50%. Half of those millennials, or Generation Y people, are already in leadership roles today, so you could call it next generation leadership is already here. You'll also notice an interesting statistic looking at this bar. The middle gray color that in 2005 represented the population, the largest part of the workforce was the baby boomers, and you'll see that they continue to decrease. In the United States alone, 10,000 people turn 65 years old every day, and they're leaving the workforce. So that you can see by 2020, there will be 5 Gen Yers or millennials for every 2 baby boomers. Guess what? They're going to be our bosses, folks. And then the other interesting statistic on this chart is that you'll see the Gen Xers, which are that dark gray. In 2005, they represented about 20% of the workforce, and by 2020, they represent about 18% of the workforce. The biggest shift of leadership in the history of mankind is occurring during these next 5 to 10 years. Because instead of handing leadership over to the next generation, there are not enough of them. So we're handing leadership to the second generation, what we call the next generation leaders. Deloitte, which has done a tremendous job of identifying human capital trends around the world, does an annual survey of HR professionals, asking them what are the most important issues that they're dealing with. This is their chart from the 2014 survey. You'll notice that the axis that goes up, the vertical axis, is talking about how ready are we to respond to these various challenges that exist in human resource management. You'll notice that the dot on the far right-hand side says leadership. What the HR leaders are telling us in thousands of companies around the world is that leadership is one of the most urgent issues we have in our companies today. And we are not prepared to answer to that challenge. This chart comes from their 2015 Human Capital Trends Survey. The dark blue scores are giving you what's called the capability gap. So the larger the gap, the more in trouble we are. The dark blue is for 2014, and it's saying the difference between how important leadership is and how prepared we are to respond to the challenge is the largest gap of any of the HR challenges facing our companies, our organizations today. You'll notice that learning and development over to the far right-hand side is a gap that didn't get any better between 2014 and 2015 because the light blue represents the scores for 2015. Look at that gap in learning and development. Who's responsible for closing that gap? The people sitting in this room. And if you come back and look at the leadership gap, you'll see that the leadership gap, both years, 2014, 2015, is the most significant gap in organizations today. So because of this, they concluded, number one, that organizations around the world are having a very, very tough time preparing next generation leaders. That leadership is one of their most important challenges to the future success of their businesses. And that a focus on leadership at all levels of an organization is going to be key to building sustainable performance. Tomorrow's leaders here in Turkey, based on surveys done in Turkey, want career and advancement opportunities. They want to see a pathway where they can gain more autonomy, they can gain more mastery, they can gain more contribution in the way that they impact their workplace. They are hungry for learning and development opportunities. I think sometimes when we gather together as a group of people, we get so concerned about MOOC and about all the different variations and about all, we forget that the most important thing to creating a learning culture is people who want to learn. And that's what we have in millennials today, people who want to learn. And then of course they want income and other financial benefits as well. So what do you think about leadership? How do you define leadership? Which are the people on this slide that you'd like to take off? And which are others that maybe you'd like to put on? Being from the United States, I can tell you that we have 2 U.S. presidents there. There's nobody in the United States that likes both of them. Half of the United States would take one of their pictures off. The other half of the United States would take their other picture off. Why? What is it that we use to define leadership? How do we think about what leadership is? Is it just about getting business results? Is it just about taking care of our people? Is it just about thinking clearly and having a vision for the future? What is leadership? I'd like to suggest to you that there are 3 different dimensions, 3 different levels of leadership. But before I do that, I'd like to give you my definition of leadership, which is more than just having followers. My definition of leadership is somebody who can influence others. Somebody who, because of their life, because of their example, because of their direction, they actually change somebody else's life. My wife and I raised 6 children because we were very concerned about education and the way education was developing in America. My wife, without much support from me, decided that she was going to be their teacher. Thank God now they've all grown up and graduated from college and we don't have to worry about it anymore. But we recognized, raising our 6 children, that they were probably more leaders than us because they influenced us far more than we influenced them. So, 3 dimensions of influence, 3 dimensions of leadership. The first is positional leadership. We follow a positional leader, somebody who has a title on their name card. We follow a positional leader because we have to. Because if we're going to be a part of whatever organization they're leading, we have to recognize their leadership. If you're going to be a part of this wonderful musical ensemble, you have to pay attention to the conductor. So we follow positional leaders because we have to. That said, there is an operating principle of integrity for a positional leader. The key for a positional leader operating with integrity is to stay within the rules of their position. For our wonderful conductor, the rules were we're all going to use the same sheet music. They weren't all playing different songs. But in business, the rules of positional leadership are usually determined by the government or by the board of directors, or maybe by your position description or your employee handbook. One great example of somebody missing the integrity of the positional leadership is Mark Hurd, who was CEO of HP. Anybody recognize that name? Hewlett-Packard had gone through several years of not satisfying the stock analysts. Several years of employees complaining, being unhappy. And the board of directors concluded that HP had become sort of corporate middle-aged. They were a little bit overweight, a little bit out of shape. They just didn't perform the way they used to. And so they hired Mark Hurd from NCR to whip them into shape. His job as CEO was to create a corporate fitness and diet program for HP. And he did wonders. He laid people off here. He cut out projects over here. He fine-tuned the research and development over here. And the stock analysts loved him. The stock analysts said he's the greatest thing that's happened to HP in a long time. And the stock value of HP went up and the profit of HP went up. And then all of a sudden, the board of directors fired him. Why did they fire him? He had hired a consultant who happened to be a female. He was paying her $10,000 a month as a consultant, but in reality, she was his lover. He was taking her out to dinner in my hometown and turning in the receipts as business expenses. And the board of directors said, you can give us great profit, you can help our stock value, but you broke one of our rules. So you have been disqualified as a positional leader. Of course, that's not the end of the story. The interesting thing is 2 weeks later, Larry Ellison at Oracle hired him. Larry said, we don't have a problem with that, come work with us. And in fact, one of my friends at Oracle said, yeah, he fits our culture pretty good. So that's an example of somebody who's breaking the rules, which is really the basis for integrity as a positional leader. Let me give you another example of somebody. This is the Inc. magazine cover that just came out last week. So you can buy this magazine at your local store if you like. The person on this cover started a business in the banking industry when he was 19 years old. He looked at the small restaurants, the small stores that were owned by individual private businesses, families, and he said they need help understanding how to process their credit cards. They need help with gift cards or anything that relates to electronic transactions. And so he started this business in his college dorm when he was 19 years old. And he's on the cover of Inc. magazine at 31. The reason he's on the cover of Inc. magazine is because he decided not only did he need to take care of his customers, but he could use his positional leadership to make things better for his employees. So several years ago, he adopted the policy. He not only runs the company, he owns the company. He adopted the policy of unlimited personal time off. Any employee can take as much time off as they want. You know what they discovered? The employees became more loyal. 3 years ago, he decided that he was going to give every employee a 20% raise at the end of the year. And what happened? His profits grew just as much as the raises that he gave. So he said, that's strange, I'm going to try that again. He gave them another 20% raise the next year. The profits went up again. Now, whether you like the idea of him giving 20% raises, I suppose if you work for him, you would like that. But whether you like that or not, the point is he was using positional leadership, staying within the rules, to influence the people around him. Finally, in April of this year, he decided that he was going to change the minimum wage for every employee in his company. Now, the U.S. government, the U.S. people are having a big conversation about what should the minimum wage be. Right now it's about $7 an hour. And there are a lot of people calling for it to be raised to $15 an hour. He decided the minimum wage for his employees going forward was going to be $70,000 a year. Of course, all the stock analysts are thinking, this is crazy. And a lot of the conservative talk show hosts in America called him a socialist. And he said, I know that this is a risk, but what is worth living for if it's not to take a risk? So he took his salary, which at the time was $1.1 million. He said, I'm going to reduce my salary to the minimum wage, $70,000 a year. And it's going to stay there until I return the profit to what it was before I made that decision. That's somebody using positional leadership. One other interesting item about that is that that happens to be my son. His mother wants him to get his hair cut. But 10,000 women on Facebook keep saying, don't cut it, don't cut it. That story of him deciding to raise the minimum wage has had 500 million hits. And he's had hundreds of letters from people all around the world, including a factory maker in Vietnam, business owners saying, I'm going to treat my employees differently because of what I saw you do. That's positional leadership. It's the first dimension of influence. So we all have a position here today. How are you using that influence? Not for yourself, but to make life better for others. The second dimension of leadership is expert leadership. This is where people follow us because of what we know, because of what we're able to do. I go to my accountant and I hardly even look at the tax return that he's completed for me these days because I've been with him for so long and he's done such a good job for me that I know his character, I know his expertise, I know that he knows tax law better than me, so he always has leadership, he always has influence over me. I do the same thing with my attorney if I have a legal matter. Recently, I had surgery on my gums. And the dental technician came after me with a needle this long, wanting to stick that thing in my mouth. And I had to decide whether or not I trusted her leadership. We follow expert leaders because we trust that they know something we don't know. They can do something for us that we can't do. And if you want to maintain or grow your expert leadership, the operating principle of integrity for expert leadership is relevance. It's staying current. It's recognizing that what you learned 5 years ago is no good anymore. Do you know that if you enter the university right now and take biology class as a freshman, that by the time you graduate from that university 4 years later, what you learned as a freshman, because we're increasing human knowledge so quickly. As a matter of fact, today, while we stand here in Istanbul, human knowledge is doubling across the planet Earth every 12 months. Think about that for a moment. Every 12 months, we are doubling the total amount of knowledge in the human race. And because of what technology is doing for us, scientists are now saying that we're going to be doubling human knowledge every 12 hours someday. So if you want to be an expert leader in learning and development, you better get learning. Because what you learned last year is already on its way to obsolescence. Expert leadership is the influence that we have because of what we know or what we can do, and people follow us because of what we do for them. And if we want to maintain or grow our expert leadership, we need to keep learning, keep getting better and better and better. You can't do that in every topic, so you've got to pick a topic. I've enjoyed the talks here today so much. It's been like a big feast for me. But I'll tell you that with all of the opportunities that exist today, the greatest risk is that you'll be a generalist and never be an expert. So how about developing a strategic learning plan for your career and for your organizations? The third dimension of leadership I refer to as character leadership. You could call it other things. You might call it inspirational leadership. But character leadership is where people follow us because they want to be like us when they grow up. They follow us because something in our vision or our example or where we're going, they want to get on the bandwagon and come along with us. And I think that this is probably the most important dimension of leadership. You can see in my model that if we have somebody who's in positional leadership and they're losing their expert leadership because they think they know it all, and they don't have any character like Mark Kerr, they've lost their character leadership, how much influence do they have? Most of our influence throughout life comes from character. I wonder how many of you in your bachelor classes at university had a course on character. I wonder how many of you in your corporate training devote a significant part of your time to learning about character. Why is it that the thing that's the greatest source of influence for us is the thing that we learn the least about? We all develop our own gut feeling about whether someone's a person of character. You run into somebody who seems to have their nose up in the air all the time. They seem to be very egocentric, and we say, not much character there. Or you run into somebody who's talking behind other people's backs and passing along gossip. You might say, not much character there. But certainly the circle of character leadership is bigger than that. Certainly there's more to it than that. So I'd like to ask you to think about character leadership falling into two categories. The first category is the values by which you decide to govern yourself. And the second category is the values by which you choose to relate to other people. So think with me for a moment. I'm going to give you my list of my personal character strengths. These are the values by which I choose to live my life. Does it mean that I always live up to it? No. It's always aspirational. I can always do more. I can always do better. But for me, it begins with personal accountability. Personal accountability. Am I willing to take responsibility and say, I'll do it, and then to follow through? Am I willing to be responsible when it didn't work out the way I wanted it to? Or do I blame other people? Or do I defend myself? Or do I deny that there's a problem? So this is the beginning of personal character for me, of what I call performance character. What about for you? If you were going to make a list of the traits by which you choose to govern yourself, what traits would be on that list? Remember, we're talking about your greatest sphere of influence. What your character leadership is. So some of mine include self-management. The ability to organize and execute around my priorities, self-control. The ability to control and use my emotions for positive ends instead of destructive ways. Honesty is a very important way that I choose to govern myself. I wasn't born with that, you know. Actually, when I was 4 years old, I lied to my mom about something and she caught me, and so she refused to get that fire truck with a little fireman that I wanted for my birthday. And to this day, I still remember that I lost something because I didn't demonstrate honesty. So I choose to govern myself by honesty. Integrity. To me, integrity means all the things we've talked about, but it also means wholeness. It means that I want my life to be holistically connected. I don't want my life to be separated. And then courage, the willingness to do the right thing even if you don't know if you're ever going to get the benefit from it. Sometimes the only benefit you get is that you knew you did the right thing. I got into a bad business deal once that cost me $5 million. And I had to decide whether or not I had the courage to keep going in the face of that great loss. Resilience, the ability to bounce back, and goal achievement. This is one of the values I choose to govern myself by, that when I make a commitment to a goal, I'm going to give it my very best, and I'm going to look at that goal every day, every week, and every month. And if I don't achieve the goal, I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm going to ask myself why, and what can I do different? How could I adjust so that I can be true to the goals I've set? So these are what I call performance strengths. They're the traits by which you choose to govern yourself. The other part of the character leadership circle is what I would call interpersonal strengths, the traits by which I choose to relate to other people. So for me, the first one is empathy. Empathy, the desire to really understand where you're coming from, what's happening in your life, why you feel the way you do, instead of make judgments about you just based on a first impression. But the willingness to suspend judgment, knowing that there's a treasure with everybody that I meet. Another one for me is evaluating others. Because of the work I do, a big part of my job is helping people learn things about themselves that they maybe don't see. To be a mirror for them so that they can understand themselves better. Presenting skills is important to me because it's part of how I influence people with my character in the way that I present. Do I present in a way that's easy or difficult for you to embrace? Persuasion, the ability to influence other people to make commitments. And then loyalty. For me, there are a lot of ways you can describe loyalty, but in my own definition of loyalty, I describe loyalty as I'm not going to talk about somebody in their absence in a way that I wouldn't talk about them if they were there. Loyalty can mean different things to you. What are the traits that you choose for the way that you're going to relate to other people? So character is really made up of your performance strengths, the traits or the values by which you will govern yourself, and your interpersonal strengths, the traits or the values by which you will govern your relationships and interact with other people. We started as a company focused on the top tier of leadership. Most of our work has been coaching executives of global companies or of large privately owned companies around the world. We've had the privilege of coaching senior leaders in 15 different countries now. But we began to recognize that we were not having the optimal impact in organizations that we want to have. Because coaching today's leaders is no guarantee of what your organization will look like tomorrow. So Randy Lisk, who was one of our associates, he was actually an electrical engineer for IBM for 23 years before he came to work with us. He got very interested in the people side of process improvement and quality and performance. He and I decided in 2010 that we were going to collaborate together to write this book called The Complete Leader, Everything You Need to Become a High-Performing Leader. Of course, in the introduction we said there's no such thing as a complete leader. And in fact, it's a journey. And if there's any sense of completion as a leader, it's if you get the pleasure of being able to hand the baton to the next generation. And once we published the book in 2014, Hassan and Bilge and Sarah here in Istanbul came to us and asked us if they could partner with us to translate the book into Turkish. The first place in the world that it's been translated in something other than English. And because of that, I'm forever indebted to them. And as we created this book so that we could give a gift to the next generation of leaders, we began to recognize that the book was only the doorway, it was only the beginning. In The Complete Leader, we look at 25 different leadership skills that are important in varying degrees depending on your expert leadership and your positional leadership. And so we built a website as well called thecompleteleader.org that has videos and podcasts and articles and blogs and book recommendations and coaching guides for every one of the 25 leadership skills. Some of those have been created by some of your members here today. Part of what motivated us to shift our direction from senior leaders, where by the way you make a lot of money, to next generation leaders is this study by IBM. They looked at organizations that spent their money throughout the organization for leadership development as opposed to only at the top. You know that last year in the United States, businesses in the United States spent $4 billion on leadership development, but they spend it all at the top. Because they say the people at the bottom don't need it so much. But this study by IBM said, no. When you have over 80% of your leaders, no matter whether they're supervising one person or they're in charge of a division or a whole company, when you have more than 80% of your leaders involved in ongoing systematic leadership development, you produce 3 times the profit as the organizations that just apply leadership in a token sort of way and think that leaders are born, that they don't have to be made. And so we've had the privilege of doing programs in 10 different countries across all industries and sectors. The picture in the lower right-hand side, or the lower left-hand side, is a leadership group in China. They're representing 5 countries in Southeast Asia. They were all learning how to use the Complete Leader book so that they could go back and they could be the teachers, they could be the trainers, they could be those that help their people learn. And on the right-hand side, this is, they're playing a game here, but actually this group is a group of very sophisticated, highly accomplished scientists in Silicon Valley. As a matter of fact, year after year after year, they win the awards for the best innovations in terms of technology, and they sell those products to Intel and to other big Silicon Valley companies. And they came to us because they said, we're fantastic engineers. We really don't know how to be leaders. Can you help us? And a couple other examples. The lower left-hand corner is a group that we work with in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I go down there and we spend some time together. Oh, it's so much fun. They teach me about what they're learning about leadership. And at the top in the middle is a group of credit managers from the National Association of Credit Managers. They do a graduate course at Dartmouth College every year, and the Complete Leader book is a part of their curriculum. It's really been a pleasure to us that the book's also being used in Masters of Leadership and Change courses at MBA schools in the U.S. as well. In the lower right-hand corner, these folks are actually lamb processors. They're the largest processors of American lamb in the world. And they're learning here about what they call Kung Fu presentations. That's a great example of how the best learning is not, I'm sorry for any offense I might cause, but the best learning is not online. The best learning is not in person. The best learning is when they're doing the teaching. And so they organize in small groups and develop their presenting, critical thinking, and problem-solving skills while they're together. So what have we learned in this whole process? We've learned that to do a great job of leadership development, give them a clear pathway. Help them see where you're going. Now, they're going to make a lot of individual choices on the way, but create a set of guardrails. Create a road that they can travel down. Give them practical and applicable content. Make sure that whatever you do with them, you get them doing things because they learn, they grow, they have their own insights when they're the ones doing the presenting instead of you. And then use those opportunities to help them learn how to build more effective relationships with each other. And finally, make sure that you provide a way to measure progress and to validate success. One of the ways that we do it is we work a lot in helping them develop their self-awareness. And so we look at their behavioral styles, how they respond to problems and deal with people, and deal with the pace of change and with rules and procedures. We look at their underlying motivators. Why do they come to work? Where do they get a great sense of satisfaction? It can be from the hunger for learning. It can be from the hunger to help other people. It may be the desire to keep score and earn money. There are a lot of different reasons, so we want to look at that. And then we want to help them begin to understand what neuroscience is teaching us about next generation leadership, that most of our decisions are actually made subconsciously. And the subconscious just informs the conscious mind. All the conscious mind can do is to reverse a decision that's already been made. And so we help them understand that dynamic and how you feed the subconscious mind if it's all the source of wisdom. And then finally we help them develop an understanding of their level of understanding around leadership skills. We break our programs into 4 different categories. First of all, leaders are clear thinkers. Because if the leader doesn't think clear, it's hard for other people to follow you. So being a clear thinker has to do with all of these different kinds of thinking skills. And then we look at leaders leading themselves, how important it is for a leader to be responsible, accountable, self-managed, resilient, flexible, and to be able to set and achieve goals. And then third, we look at leaders leading others. And of course, there are a lot of different skills that we look at here. It begins with empathy, and it includes different communication skills and problem solving and conflict management, resolution, and negotiation. And it ends up with teamwork and employee coaching and customer focus. So again, a clear pathway, practical and ethical content, interactive work to anchor the new learning, relationship building, and a way to measure progress and validate success. Finally, leaders ultimately are going to be judged based on whether they're authentic. Somebody asked me about your elections that took place on Sunday. I arrived on Sunday evening. And my comment was, anytime a politician tells you that he or she is authentic, it's kind of difficult to be authentic and be a politician. The two don't fit very well together. But I would say that in my country as well. But what I will say about great leaders, because sometimes somebody goes into office as a politician and they become a great statesman. There are 4 things that great leaders do throughout their journey toward completion. The first thing is that they brood creatively over purpose. They're always thinking about tomorrow. They're always thinking about the future. They're always thinking about why are we doing what we're doing. The second thing that great leaders do is that they convert problems into opportunities. The truth is, if the problems disappeared, none of us would have a job. Great leaders convert problems into opportunities. The third thing that great leaders do is they inspire people to make commitments that they wouldn't otherwise make. And finally, great leaders serve a people or a purpose that transcends self-interest or self-promotion. I don't say that they kill it. I don't think it's human to kill it. But they transcend self-interest and self-promotion so that they can make a difference in other people's lives. One of the greatest privileges any of us has is the opportunity to be a person of influence. We all strive and dream of climbing that ladder of success that we call positional leadership. But really, if you get there and you haven't developed expert leadership or character leadership, the ladder's going to tip over. So I hope that you'll take some of the ideas that I've shared with you today and develop your own strategic plan for how you can become a complete leader. Thank you.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Sizin adınıza Sizin adınıza TEGEP Türkiye Eğitim Ürünleri Vakfı'na bir bağışta bulundu. O da bunun sertifikası. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz efendim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.